Hello dear students, hope you are great. Today we're going to take chapter 1 matter and its properties, section 2 characteristic properties. All substances have a characteristic properties. Every substance around us, whether it's an element or compound, has a characteristic properties. So any substance, either element or compound, has a characteristic properties. Chemists use these properties to distinguish between substance and to separate them. So chemists use these properties of substance to separate or to distinguish between substance and to separate them. These properties are either intensive or extensive properties. So properties are either intensive or extensive properties. Watch this video.
Hello, very good day and welcome. Today we will talk about the intensive and extensive properties of matter. The attributes or qualities of substances are known as properties. These properties can be classified into two groups, intensive properties and extensive properties. Among the properties of substances, there are some that can be appreciated through the senses, such as color, flavor, touch, sensation, etc., which are called organoleptic characters. Organoleptic characters and physical constants are called intensive or specific properties. These properties do not depend on the mass available, since for the same substance they are the same, both in a small portion and in a larger quantity. Some examples of intensive properties are elasticity, speed, specific volume, density, boiling point, melting point, viscosity, among others. If you have a liter of water, its boiling point is 100 degrees Celsius, considering that it is at a pressure atmosphere. If another liter of water is added, the new system, consisting of 2 liters of water, has the same boiling point as the original system. This illustrates the non-additivity of intensive properties. On the contrary, the extensive properties depend on the mass that is available, as is the case of the volume, weight, surface, etc. For example, when we talk about the volume of a body, we will see that it varies depending on whether it has more or less mass. 2 liters of water will have more mass than half a liter and therefore more volume. If we compare 2 objects of the same thickness but of different lengths, like 2 pencils, we will know that the longest will have more mass. Extensive properties are additive because the same extensive property values can be added together. In general, the quotient between 2 extensive magnitudes gives us an intensive magnitude. For example, from the division between mass and volume, the density is obtained. This is how we quickly learn what are the intensive and extensive properties and the differences that exist between them. See you in the next video.
So, extensive properties depend on the amount of matter that is present. So, extensive properties depends on the amount of matter, which depends on amount of matter mean mass. So, extensive properties depend on mass, like volume, mass, the amount of energy in substance. Look like volume, mass, size, weight, length. These properties are called extensive properties. For example, when you compare between 2 objects by measured lengths, look which one, A or B, has more mass or have more mass. B. So the amount of matter in object B greater than the amount of matter in object A. So this property is called extensive properties. Intensive properties do not depend on the amount of matter. So intensive properties is a properties do not depend on the amount of matter or mass. Such properties like melting point, boiling point, density, ability to conduct electricity and to transfer energy as heat. All of those do not depend on the amount of matter. For example, when you compare boiling point of water, the amount of water, for example, in object A is 1 liter and object B 2 liters. So which one has more boiling point? Whose it will boil at 100 degree. So these properties like boiling point do not depend on the amount of matter or the mass. So this property is called intensive properties like melting point, boiling point, density, temperature, luster, hardness. All of those are called intensive properties, which do not depend on the amount of matter, while extensive properties depend on the amount of matter or depend on the mass of the matter. Another properties like physical properties and chemical properties. What is the difference between physical and chemical properties? Physical property is a characteristic that can you observed or measure without changing the identity of substance. For example, when you get a paper and cut it into 2 pieces, you imagine that the size of the paper will change, but the substance that made up paper is still the same, doesn't change. So this property called physical property. Example of physical property are melting point and boiling point. When you melt a piece of ice which is made of water in a solid state, made of water, so the ice melt and turn into liquid. And also it made of water. So you observe that solid or ice change into liquid. This process called melting. You observe the matter that made up solid is still present in liquid, as liquid is made of water, and also solid or ice made of water. So the substance that made up ice and liquid is still the same, doesn't change. So this property called physical property. A change in a substance that does not involve change in the identity of substance, like a melting point or like a melting or boiling, is called physical change. So this change is called physical change. Example of physical change includes grinding, cutting. When you cut the paper into 2 pieces, so the identity of substance or the paper is still or doesn't change. So this change called physical change. When you cut a paper, when you melt or boiling water, when you boil water, the liquid change into water vapor. Water vapor, the material that made up water vapor is water. So the matter that this or substance that made up the liquid and water vapor doesn't change. So this change called physical change. Physical property can be observed without changing the identity of substance. So what about chemical property? Chemical property describes the ability of substance to undergo change in identity. So it's a property that you observe, but change happen in the identity of substance. Physical versus chemical property. Physical, like a color. You observe that the color change, but the identity of substance doesn't change. Shape, you observe that the shape of the substance is change, but the color doesn't change. So it's physical property. Size, density, amount, volume. So what about physical property? Like flammability. When you burn wood, so wood react with oxygen and burn, give us ash plus carbon dioxide. So what happened? Wood was changed totally into another substance, into ash and carbon dioxide. So the identity of substance totally changed. So this property called physical property. Flammability, rusting. When the iron rust turned into rust, so the matter that made up rust is different from the matter that made up iron. Burning, corrosion, reactivity, all of those is a chemical properties. Example: melting is a physical property, flammable is a chemical, density is physical, magnetic, physical also. Turns into air, like iron. When iron turns or rust in air is a chemical. Extensive property depends on the amount of matter or mass. Intensive do not depend on or depends on the identity of substance, but not the amount or not the amount of matter or mass. Like boiling point is intensive, which is do not depend on the amount of matter. Volume depends on the amount of matter, so it's extensive property. Mass, extensive property depends on the amount of matter. Density, intensive property does not depend on the amount of matter. Conductivity does not depend on the amount of matter, so it's intensive property. That's it. Thanks for watching.